representing the ANA here to welcome P. Scott Rubin, noted author both for the ANA, the American Numismatic Society, Coin World, and the Numismatic Bibliomania Society. And Scott's going to talk to us about his experience over 50 years of coins, catalogs, people, some reminiscences. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hello. Feel free to ask any questions while I go along. I'm just going to talk to you about collecting. See, I'm a numismatic addict. Something that has to do with numismatics, I have to learn it, something new every day. Or I go through withdrawals. So, I've been collecting for over 50 years. And I'm going to give you some reminiscences of people I've run into, coins I've run into, paper money I've run into, and particularly I might intersperse auction catalogs that I've run into because I like them. And I use them for research. And that's sort of how I get my fix, is if I can't find the coin or get a coin, at least I can find information about them. So actually, I'll give you a little hint. The first coin dealer I ever ran into when I was 7 years old was a gentleman named Ed Hips. If you want to meet him, he's out on the floor at the convention. He's been a dealer. We talked today and yesterday, and he told me 1960 was the first ANA convention he went to. And I didn't get to go to one until 1969. I was a little young to just go and do it on my own. And so this is his 50th ANA that he's been to. And I remember the first coins I bought from him were Indian head pennies. My allowance was 25 cents a week, and I got five of them from him. And as I remember, one of them was an AU, about uncirculated. I'm sure the price has gone up since then. And I come from New Jersey, and the state capital, Trenton, was in the area of where I lived. And it was amazing in the 1950s and early 60s. There were a number of coin dealerships just in the city of Trenton. Ed Hips, who later moved to Dallas and is a fairly well-known name in numismatics and handled some big collections and especially some very rare coins. Isn't the only dealer who from that area went on to sort of fame in our numismatic circles. There was, you might not know the name today because he's retired, is Norm Pullen. When I say he's retired, I think he still goes into a store every once in a while, but he basically doesn't have to, he just likes it. And him and his brother Bill Pullen were coin dealers in our area. Norm moved to Maine. Billy became partners for a short time with Hanks from Texas under a firm called Pullen and Hanks. They actually held a couple of auction catalogs, which I have in my library, so I know that, including one of them which held an 1804 silver dollar, which I'll get to a little later. But there were also there was a coin store right across the street from where my father had a business when I was young. It was known as the Princeton Coin and Stamp Company. It wasn't in Princeton, it was in Trenton. I don't know why he picked Princeton, sounded good, I guess. And years later, Bill Pullen opened a store in Princeton and called it the same thing. So there was also another dealer named Shedden who had a store. The interesting one wasn't in Trenton, but his name was Bill Brown. Bill Brown seemed to get a lot of good coins. And he had a little store in a town called Lambertville, New Jersey. And it was right along the Delaware River. And every month he'd have a coin auction in the local firehouse. I remember as some friend of the family took me to one of those, and I was quite impressed that there were always a group of people buying coins at auction, and he did this on a monthly basis for years. That sort of has died out in this era where you don't really see small coin stores opening up and doing business in small towns. And it's a shame, because I remember many years ago, a friend of the family said they were in some small town in Pennsylvania, and there were like 3 stores in the town, and one was a coin store. And the thought that went through my mind was, well, what else would you have there? But it's all depends on your opinion of what's important. But Trenton wasn't that far from New York City. It still isn't. But and during the 60s and way before that, there were some major coin shows that used to take place. The Metropolitan Coin Show, which took place, I think, at least 2 times a year in Manhattan, was a wonderful place to go and just see all the coins you drooled about by looking through a red book or and saying, do they really exist? Does anybody can afford to own these things? And I'll give you a name of a person who I ran into one of these shows and was extra nice to me. Was a guy by the name of John Pittman. If any of you have ever heard of John Pittman, you know he was a past president, I believe, of A&A, and a very, very big collector. His collection was sold by David Akers in 3 parts about 10 years ago, I guess it is now. And but John was putting out an exhibit at the Metropolitan Show, and there was an armed guard next to him, and he's unwrapping these things from what looked like aluminum foil. And he's putting out, and he takes one of these and unwraps it, and there's an 1827 quarter. And he's putting it out, and I go, is that an original? And he goes, oh yeah, that's King Farouk coin. I bought that at the Farouk sale. And I go, what do you have it wrapped in? He goes, lead foil. I wrap my coins in lead foil. The only person I've ever known to do that, and it seems to have preserved his coins, so he knew what he was doing. But he also picked out an 1852 proof half cent. And I say, is that an original or a restrike? And he goes, well, nobody's really sure what the originals are, but I think this is one of them. And it wasn't the large berry variety, because he didn't have one when his collection was sold. That's the one that in those days people presumed was the original, but nobody's really sure to this day which is the original of that issue. But very, very rare coins. And but the point of the story is, here's just this young person coming up to a very, very big collector, and he took the time to explain to me, how he got his coins, what they were, let me look at them, and he didn't shoo me away. The guard didn't come over and handcuff me. So it was a much more laid-back era. We used to have some local coin shows in Trenton. Trenton Coin Club was a very big club. It still exists. It doesn't meet in Trenton anymore. It still goes by the same name, but it meets in one of the townships around Trenton. And but in those days, they used to have a big show once a year at the War Memorial Building in Trenton. And I remember that caught my eye at one exhibit was a complete set of 1943 copper pennies. When I say complete set, it had a P, D, and S. And I'm going, years later, I've read that there was only, one S found at a particular time. So, it's either Frank Spadone, who was a big collector in those days from New Jersey, either he had one of these sets put together, or it was a copper-plated set that they put out. But I was too naive to know the difference or whatever in those days. But it was a very interesting exhibit. Also in New York, at these big shows, there was always one dealer, and later on he was always given a corner table at the show, usually right at the beginning of the entrance. His name was Aaron Feldman. And Aaron Feldman was sort of someone that I looked up to because all he dealt with was coin books and auction catalogs. And I remember the first time I ever met him at one of these shows, I remember he had like a little corner book holder with 4 or 5 catalogs, very big ones in it. And I had no idea what they were. I had never seen a large-size Chapman catalog or knew what they were at the time. But later on I realized that's what they were. And he was selling plated large-size Chapman catalogs. Well, when I started collecting auction catalogs and putting together my set, these were dirt cheap compared to what they are today. I mean, I'll give you a little story. I've mentioned Ed Hips already. Ed knew I started collecting these, and this is from the point of, you know, I can't buy the coins. They're getting too expensive, especially on my allowance, but the books, I can read about them and see pictures or know when they sold or whatever. So Ed would buy catalogs for me whenever anybody wanted to dump their catalogs or get rid of them. And one show he went to in New York, somebody came up to him and says, I have these old 19th century catalogs. And he just bought a giant box of them. He didn't even look at them. He says, I know who I'm selling them to, so I don't care. And he bought 2 boxes, one about yo big and the other one taller. And he brought them back, but he goes, one problem. I bought them both for you, but before I could get out of the show, somebody bought the big one. But I have to mail it to him, so if you want to look through it, you can, but I have to send that to him. But you can have the other one. And the other one was just filled with some catalogs called Elliott Woodward's catalogs, W. Elliott Woodward. And they were all Elliott Woodward catalogs. And from that nucleus, I was able to put together about 1/3 or better of all the Woodward catalogs, just from that box. Most of the other box contained what I can remember looking at were Kogan catalogs. These are all 1860s, 70s, 1880s, nothing much newer than 1890. And as I told Ed yesterday when I was talking to him, do you know what was at the bottom of that box? He goes, no. I said, there was this one big catalog that was the whole bottom of the box. I said, it wasn't a large-size Chapman. It was a large-size Woodward, which I had never heard of. I had no idea that they were ever made. And it wasn't until many years later when John Adams, who was here at the show, did a book on 19th century auction catalogs where he described every known catalog of the major dealers, that he described that for the first maybe dozen or so Woodward sales, Woodward would make a deluxe large size catalog. Basically all he did was print the same size text in a big paper. And and they usually had runs of between 10 and 15. Well, when Adams did his book, I didn't know John Adams at this point. And there was one problem. The one I had, he didn't list. It was the last of the large size. It was 1866 Hoffman sale. And John had never seen one at that point. And that was at the bottom of the box. And I'm sure that box didn't cost me any more than $100 for everything in it. And today that would be worth a considerable amount of money. But that's the way auction catalogs were. Woodwards were expensive in those days. You had to pay maybe $1 or so for them instead of 10 cents, 15 cents that some of the things cost. of course, I'll get back to some of the catalogs, but let's talk about some of the people who I then began to meet over the years. Abe Kossoff was probably the biggest name dealer in the country when I was collecting in those days. In the late 60s, when I was starting to go to shows. The first time I met him was probably in 1973 Boston A&A show. And I went over to his table, and I was at awe that I even could meet such a gentleman. And he was very laid back, very nice. And all he had in his case were patterns or trial pieces of Pioneer Gold coins. And it didn't look like he was even trying to sell them. He was just there to have something to display and be there. And I remember a collector coming up to him, a young man who was older than I was at the time, but a young man comes up to him and goes, "I'm just starting to collect." And Abe goes, "Well, what are you collecting?" And he goes, "Well, I'm starting on patterns." And both Abe and I looked at each other and went, "That's a really weird place to start." And it was just the look on our faces that we just both agreed that was didn't seem like the normal for people collecting Lincoln pennies and barber dimes, maybe a strange thing to be collecting in those days. But here was a guy who was just going to start out with patterns. So that was my first reminiscence of Abe, and I ran into him a couple more times, mainly at big auctions. He was at the Garrett sales, and I walked up to him and I asked him about a particular coin he sold back in 1944. He had listed in one of his catalogs an 1817 over 4 $half. And no big write-up, a one-line description, nothing about it. And I said, "You sure that was a over 4 and not over a 3 or something?" He says, "I have no idea. If I said 4, it probably was. Nobody cared in those days." And any of you who are knowledgeable about the bust halves, that was like when Overton became involved, that was his big rarity that he quote unquote discovered. And there was one just sold at auction last month, the finest known, which was Overton's when he collected, for a record price of over $300,000. That would be something that Abe Kossoff goes, "Yeah, I just sold it, so who knows." It wasn't a big thing in those days. Another person I met who is a big dealer by the 60s, in 1964 he issued the first auction catalog to contain a color photograph on the cover. It was Lester Merkin when he sold the Helfenstein collection of large cents. And I remember when I was in college, I went to school out in Long Island, so I would have a tendency to go into New York to see what I could see in coins. Lester had a store. Of course, when I was in college, my wife's sitting out here, so she knows the stories. I used to wear a cape. I had a Fu Manchu mustache. And and I walked into Lester's store, and he sort of, "Okay, what's this character doing here?" So we really never got into a good conversation. I met him when he sold his library years later. But I never really got to talk to Lester. But he used to have a wonderful collection of coins coming through his hands. And more will be known about Lester as time goes on. He's one of the unsung, real big-time dealers in numismatics that only those people who have really, the big dealers themselves, really know how big he was. Another person I ran into, mainly because of an auction sale, was a gentleman named Cam Awash. Cam died a number of years ago, just when he was really getting involved in coins. He's one of the founders of Liberty Seated Coin Club. He was a half dime and dime specialist. He wrote a book on Liberty Seated dimes, which I helped him with. But Cam was very helpful. He got me involved in writing numismatic articles for Liberty Seated Coin Club. That was the first publication I ever wrote for. And very instrumental in having me meet other people. He introduced me, even though I had met him before, Walter Breen. He was doing a lot of research with Walter, so he introduced me to Walter. One of the other things, I never got to meet the gentleman, but Cam had just finished going over all the dimes and half dimes from the Eliasberg collection. He had met Louis Eliasberg, and Mr. Eliasberg had let him go through the entire collection, look for varieties and everything. And it was about that time that Mr. Eliasberg did a talk at Evergreen, which is at the time housed the Garrett collection, or did, let's see, yeah, at that time it still housed the Garrett collection. In 1976, he did a talk there and reminisced about his life. Well, he actually had that talk printed, and a few copies were given out besides to the people who attended the talk. And Cam Awash gave me a copy of that, and I was very thankful I got a copy of that publication. Cam passed away through a problem with throat cancer, and the real sad part of that in his life was he was a singer. He was an opera singer, and so that was a really sad happening. Other dealers that I've ran into out of the New York area, one who's here on the floor, who is a very, very intelligent dealer. He handles some of the greatest stuff I've ever seen in colonial material, is Anthony Terranova. Tony is sort of low-key, and but he has been instrumental in a number of discoveries and amazing finds in numismatics. I'll give you an instance of something I happened on when he had just discovered it. One of the coins is actually in a sale coming up next month. The Dan Holmes collection of large cents, which any of you who have ever seen large cents, you want to get this catalog, because it's the first time every, not just Sheldon number, but every Sheldon variety is included in an auction catalog. There's only one coin that is not in the collection. It's unique, and it's in this American Numismatic Society's collection. They loaned it to the Goldbergs for photography and exhibit with this collection, so people could see a complete collection of every known large cent variety. Well, one time in the 1970s, I was visiting a coin shop that's no longer in business, Harmer Rook, in New York. One summer day, and I walked in, and Tony was behind the counter with one of the owners, and he goes, "Come here, you gotta look at this." It was a Jefferson head cent, 1795, and he goes, "Look at the edge." It was a lettered edge variety, and there are only today like 3 known, and all of them are in some way unique, either because of the planchet or the edge lettering. And this was a really amazing discovery. But that was the kind of stuff that Tony would come across, and he would just find. Years later, a coin that I did a lot of research on, I did a paper for A&S and at a talk at their COAC conferences in 1984 on the silver center cent. Tony found the only known copy without the silver center. It has the hole for it, and I believe it's just a struck piece without ever trying to put the silver center in. But also, I'll give you another instance of Tony's discoveries. when I was, I do a lot of patterns, as I've just said, on the silver center cent. Tony knew I was very interested in the 1792 issues, especially the quarter, which at the time there were only 4 known: 2 in copper, 2 in white metal, and 2 uniface white metal trial pieces. That was the entire known population of them. Well, Tony goes to an exhibit at the New York Historical Society, which is supposed to be all about metals. And he's walking through the exhibit and he looks down and there's 2 white metal pieces, one showing the obverse and one showing the reverse of the 1792 quarter. And he goes, that's not a metal. And how come there's 2? So he got in touch with Stax in New York to try to get them to get in touch with New York Historical Society. And they did. And New York Historical Society allowed Mike Hodder to go take a look at what they had there. And lo and behold, these are the only 2 white metal pieces that are finished coins. The other 2 were struck outside of collars. These were struck with collars. And they're slightly different in that one of them is has the die rotated about 20 degrees than the other one, which is made in proper alignment. This was just something Tony just saw and knew what he was looking at. He didn't know if they were both uniface, like the trial copies or whatnot. But all 3 of us went back and we weighed them and measured them and got close looks at them. They're very pretty, very nice pieces, practically uncirculated. There are some little scuff marks on them. The interesting thing is, like many other collections, they have no idea where they got them from. They could have come from the designer's family. They could have come from some other big collector who managed to get them over the years. But the New York Historical Society didn't even know what they were, let alone how they got them. And they're still there. Along those lines, I was going through a publication by Stax done in the 40s called Numismatic Review. And there were a lot of little articles in there about little things that people ignored or whatever. One of them was about an 1855 half dollar that was struck in aluminum. And it said it was at Princeton University's collection. Well, I don't live far from Princeton University, so at some point I called the curator, who was a lovely woman named Brooks Levy, who is a very strong supporter of the American Numismatic Society. And she was very much interested in ancient coins and didn't pay too much attention to the U.S. coins in the collection. And I asked her if they still had the coin and whether I could get a look at it, maybe get some photographs of it. And I'd like to do an article for the numismatist. And no problem, came over. She didn't have any photographs. She had her son shoot photographs for me that they used in the article. And as far as I could ascertain from the stories and information I could gather, that may be the first coin ever made in aluminum. And now the question came, where did they get it from? Classic answer from a museum in some cases. We don't know. Well, I said, I'll tell you where he got it. I came across, this is why I like auction catalogs. I came across in 1880, I'm trying to remember the year, 1883, I believe, by Edward Cogan's son. And it was his own auction catalog. In other words, it was his own copy. And it's a priced catalog. And in there, it has what everything sold for and who bought them. And in the case of this aluminum $50, it was sold in that sale. And it had a K as the buyer. And I've checked this out. If you got a priced copy from somebody else who attended the sale, it would only say K in it as the buyer, which, who could K be? It could be a number of people. There were a number of collectors with that last name, with that initial in their last name. But thumbing through the catalog, I found in the margin, K equals Garrett. So it was Thomas Garrett who had bought the piece in the 1880s. And the assumption is that when the Garrett collection was loaned to Princeton during the early 20th century by Robert Garrett, and the collection was then traded to his brother, John Work Garrett, they packed everything up, sent it to him, and they left the $50 behind. And that's how Princeton wound up with a unique aluminum $50. So this is just an example of why I like the things I like in numismatics. Let me go along with some people that I've met. Doug Winter, who I've known since he was a teenager, is a dealer downstairs. He is probably one of the foremost experts on gold dollars, gold coins of the various southern mints. And Carl Carlson, who is a great numismatic researcher. I used to do research for him when he worked at Stax, and between the two of us, we put together a number of pedigrees and corrected pedigrees. I know Walter Breen gets knocked a lot of times for his pedigrees, and I used to do that to him all the time. He would say, well, here's the pedigree of a particular coin, and I'd go, I don't think so. Did you know it appeared in such and such a sale? And he'd go, oh. And then he'd, especially when he was doing his encyclopedia, he gave me an advanced copy, and we went over a lot of the pedigrees of the rarer pieces, and a lot of them got changed. And that was from only what I knew, so there were probably other things that could be changed. Carl Carlson, before he went to work for Stax, worked for NASCA and a couple of other companies. And Martin Generke also worked with him. They both wound up working at Stax for a while. They were, between the two of them, they had a big impact on me, both in doing research. And Martin, I've talked about John Adams' book on 19th century auction catalogs. He also has one on 20th century auction catalogs. Well, Martin Generke, who does a lot like I do on different keeping lists of things, decided to keep a list of every known auction catalog in the U.S. And he published, the last was 9th edition of it, from 1980s through 1990. He kept updating them. And so I'd get a copy of this and I go, Martin, you missed like 30 of these, and we kept adding and adding, and eventually I think his last volume there were like 15 or 16,000 auction catalogs, American auction catalogs. I'm sure that number's almost doubled since 1990. If anybody was as precise as he was in getting the information. But Martin still keeps that kind of information, but he doesn't do it with as much fervor as he did in the past. He also does broken banknotes and things like that, and that he keeps track of serial numbers and has another series of books on that kind of thing. He kept telling me, you ought to collect paper money instead of coins. It's much more interesting. There are also, I've talked mostly about coin people. There are a number of book people who I've known through the years. And some of them I got to know, like Aaron Feldman from meeting him at shows, Frank Caton, who basically had the only really consistent auction catalog of books and auction catalogs. He was the only person in the country doing it about the time when I started collecting. Everybody else, like Aaron and a gentleman named James Brown out of Newark, New Jersey, would do it by mailing you lists that they have, things they'd have or whatnot. James Brown I got to know pretty well because I was fairly close to him. And James, I guess during the 1940s and 50s, was a big collector in North Jersey and hung around a lot of the big collectors, some of the biggest names in the New York area. But by the time I knew him, he was getting on there in age and not getting around much at all. But he had this storefront, which in Newark, which wasn't in a great area, just filled with coin books. And what I do is I was starting to work at this point, and I would save up some dollars and go there and buy a bunch of things and then come home and go, well, I'll save up some more. And the same thing was true of Aaron Feldman. By this time, Aaron didn't have any store or anything. He'd set up at coin shows. But he had his apartment in New York, which actually I think was his son's apartment. He lived there. And his bedroom, Aaron's own bedroom, was basically where he kept many of his books. And he had a walk-in closet, which was filled floor to ceiling with books on auction catalogs. So I would go there and go, well, I want to buy some, but I don't know, I need everything you have here practically. So he'd go, well, how much do you have to spend? And I'd give him a figure, and we'd go in and we'd pick out, and he says, you don't want those, that's mostly foreign, and you'll take these. And we usually, if I came with $100, I'd leave with $200 worth of material, and I'd pay him off. And then I'd start all over again. And I was able to finish off collections like a complete set of Stax catalogs, complete set of Woodwards, complete set of Mells. I'm missing a couple of Chapmans. Most of them don't have any numismatics in them. I think there's one that's numismatic that I don't have. And many other auction catalogs that were easy to get. But I had to go through people like Aaron Feldman, James Brown, Frank and Louise Caton, were the big people in those days. Then came a whole new generation of book people, mainly through the help of Jack Collins and George Colby. They started the Numismatic Bibliomania Society. And Jack, I really got to know mainly because I was interested in half cents at this point. And Jack was working on a book with Walter Breen on half cents. I had already met Roger Cohen and had known him fairly well. He had done a book on half cents. And, but Jack and I would be in constant contact as he was working on this book. Big problem with Jack was he was a perfectionist. So we were lucky the half cent book ever got finished because he never finished the Breen large cent book. That's how Bowers got it and Borchardt finished it. Because it was never good enough. And Jack would have been working on it for another 10 years yet. But Jack and George Colby became good friends of mine over the years. I don't think there was a week I didn't call Jack Collins on the phone up until he passed away in 1992 or 3. And he was an amazing person. If you forget the numismatics, we'd call him up about a numismatic thing. And he grew up around here in California, in the Los Angeles area. And he had worked in Hollywood for different production companies. And he had amazing stories, he had an amazing sense of humor, so it was just fun to talk to. And, but you always got your numismatic fix from talking to him. Then we wound up with a number of other book dealers who have popped up. Some are still in business, some have passed away. There's Charlie Davis, who is still in the book business. When I was president of the Numismatic Bibliomania Society, I talked him into being our editor. We always had a problem getting an editor for our publication. At one point we had an editor who was just too many critical ideas about numismatics that used to get us in trouble. So we sort of wanted to phase him out. So Charlie helped me out in that way. And Ramey Bourne, another person who was numismatic dealer, collector, big time collector. And Ramey, after he got out of the book business, spent a lot of time with A&A and was on the board recently for A&A. People who've passed away are Jack Collins, John Bergman, who was a very good Los Angeles book dealer. But he was almost everything in his collection had to be pristine. I mean, in my collection, if it isn't used, I don't know why I have it. But John always wanted nice, pristine books, a beautiful library. Ken Lowe, who passed away, he was a partner with Myron Zenos, who's here at the show, in Money Tree. And if you ever want to read a lively publication on numismatic books and periodicals and books, get a copy of one of the Money Tree catalogs that Ken Lowe wrote, because he would write 2 pages on a $5 item if he thought it was interesting. Armin Champa, who has passed away, at one time probably had the biggest collection of numismatic publications in the country, outside of museums and libraries like the ANS and ANA. Armin, people used to say, kept the business going, because if he wanted something, he'd pay anything for it. And then he'd go and have them bound, some of them shamelessly bound, in that he'd put his name on them, or say, finest copy known, Armin Champa, and it just, if you wanted the book, it just didn't seem to go right. But, and David Sklow, who is, for a short time, he's had his own business, then for a short time after Ken Lowe's death, he worked with Myron for Money Tree before they closed down Money Tree. Now he's in his business by himself. These are all people who I've known through books. And they're people, the ones who are still around, I still talk to. It's a good way of meeting people with your interest, no matter what it is, whether it's half cents, large cents, banknotes, whatever. You'll find people who are very interested in it, and they're just interesting to talk about too, and it's kept me going, keeps my fix going. I've mentioned book people. I haven't mentioned too many of the copper people, though. That was my specialty for a number of years. I collected large cents and then half cents. I got hooked on half cents by die variety because it wasn't as big a number as large cents. And I figured it may be doable if I don't collect the proofs. Well, it was until I got all except the rarity 8s and rarity 7 pieces, and price started going through the roof. But that's when I got more coin books. One of the first people who got me interested and got me to join clubs was a gentleman named Enoch Blackwell. He's a local collector. Much like me, he just a collector, never was in the business, didn't do anything else, to make money out of his coins or whatever, just loved them. And Enoch said, you got to join EAC. You'll meet all sorts of people. It's really great. So we joined. I was probably the next member after him. That was back in the early 1970s. So I know my membership number is number 211. They're up to the thousands. So it's a very large group and with a good number of members today. Jules River. Jules passed away a few years ago. A very well-known war hero, big supporter of ANA, His collection was sold through Heritage in 3 parts. He collected silver and copper by die variety. And he probably had one of the biggest collections ever put together of all of that. And it probably would have been bigger except for his desire to also help people. So if somebody wanted something really bad that he had, he would trade it to them or sell it to them. So a number of pieces. I'll tell you one story that most people don't know. I can tell this since Jules is no longer alive. At one point, a friend of mine, Sam Calavita, had bought an 1804 dollar. He was a local dealer, and he bought the Garrett piece. And he wanted to sell it. And he put it up for auction. It didn't sell. And I said, well, I'll tell, I was talking to Jules, and Jules goes, well, if he still has it for sale, I'll buy it. What do you think he wants for it? And I gave him a rough idea of the price. He said, I'll buy it. So I called my friend, and he said, we have somebody interested in it. If it doesn't go, Jules could have it. But I couldn't tell him who it was at that point. Jules didn't want anybody to know that he was buying it. And Jules goes, I know I'll have to sell some stuff to buy it, but it's okay, because my wife hates these antique cars I have, so I'll just sell them. So he was very low key, Jules, but a wonderful person, and he was so active in EAC. He would give lectures and talks and demonstrations on how to grade coins. And EAC, when you went to one of their early meetings, that's one of the things you sat down and you learned. And Jules is the one who taught me basically how to grade. And it was wonderful. And it's the kind of thing you have to pass on. I know there are grading services today. I know they claim to be able to grade any coin. But I have yet to see a coin graded by any grading service that Jules River would have agreed with. On copper at least. Doug Smith, a very interesting person. Doug was a big-time large cent collector. He loved the stuff. I don't think Doug ever got married. Doug's love, I think, was copper. If you ever go through a pedigree list of some 1802s, 3s, some 1798s maybe, forget which years, he would pick certain years that he liked. He might own the coin 3 times in the pedigree list. He would buy it, get tired of it, sell it. Next time it came up, he goes, I miss it, buy it again. So it's not unusual to see Doug Smith's name 2 or 3 times, and it's not because the coin didn't sell, it's because he bought it back, because he wanted it. Doug told a very interesting story that most people don't know about. There was a lot of controversy a number of years ago about William Sheldon and him taking coins out of ANS's library. Well, he told a story about when he was younger and he found a rare variety of large cent. Now, he lived in New York, so did Sheldon. And he said, he showed the coin to Sheldon, and Sheldon goes, yeah, that may be better than my coin or whatever. Why don't you meet me at ANS and we'll compare the coins? So they go up to ANS, and Dr. Sheldon takes him down to a vault, takes out a row of quarters from the vault, and large cents, and picks up one of the large cents and says, here's mine, and let's compare them. Now, mine's a little bit better than yours, whatever. And he goes, Doug Smith goes, we're at ANS, why don't we compare it against the clap coin, which was a very complete collection that ANS owned. And Dr. Sheldon goes, okay, pulls out the tray next to it. That's where they were kept. Dr. Sheldon's collection was kept tray to tray with ANS. I don't know how many people had access to it. I don't know the stories. I don't know anything about Dr. Sheldon's personality and what went on. There's a lot of evidence that he really did take those coins. But there's also circumstantial evidence that he may have traded things to ANS that were not copper to better his own collection. Who would know? And as I've talked about, some libraries and collections knowing where they got their things, they weren't always kept as well as they purport to keep them. I'm going to run through a couple of other names quickly, and then I'll open it to questions. Tom Catman, Milt Pfeiffer, Bob Ewell, Gene Bragg, and Roger Cohen were all half-cent collectors who kept me going at a time when I just had to collect something. And all of them were well known at their time. Some of these names you've never heard of. But if you ever go into Pennywise, Pennywise, the publication for the EAC, you will find a lot of articles by these people, especially Milt Pfeiffer wrote a list of important large half-cent catalogs. Tom Catman did die varieties of 1804s. Gene Bragg had a phenomenal collection, and we all know Roger Cohen published a book on it. Can I have any questions from anybody? Yes?
Was Aaron Felder the one who came up and buy the book before the court?
As far as I know, yes. Some people say it may have been used before him, but I've never seen an instance where it was used before him. Any other questions? Well, if not, thank you very much.